Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another podcast. We're super excited to be back. And this week we have Natalie and Melly who will be bringing the topic. Natalie is introducing the topic and leading this one mainly, but Melly's here for support. And Isaac is substituting for Daisy. So we have Isaac today. And yeah, we're super excited to get into this topic. Natalie, would you like to introduce it?
So the topic today that we're going to talk about is the importance of fellowship/communion.
Okay, so the question I had for you guys is, what is fellowship and how do you define it?
Fellowship, speaking for myself, I think it has to do a lot with setting aside of time to have conversations. I feel like the big thing about fellowship is having conversations that are centered around God. I think that's like the key about fellowship, because it's easy to have relationships with people. It's easy to have conversations with people. But when it comes to fellowship, I think it's a lot different, because it's a centered conversation about God and just going in depth with that and just like all the different perspectives that come in, and that allows for fellowship.
So when I think of fellowship, I think of like Grey's Anatomy, like doctors do their fellowship. So like they're with someone and they're learning something. So when I think of fellowship, I think of like you're learning something. Like when you're in school, you have a fellowship with someone, you're learning something. So I think of like fellowship as someone is teaching you something in that way. Like you still have a friendship with them, but they're teaching you something. So that's what comes to mind when I think of fellowship.
So yeah, my definition of fellowship is kind of like Yoreli's. It's that time set apart of just being present with the community that God has given you, and you're just engaging and really just actively being there and just trying to learn more about each other, about God, about life.
I just think about friendships. That's what comes to my mind.
Okay, so my next question is like, how do you distinguish fellowship and friendship? Like, what's the difference?
Do you want to start that one off, Isaac?
Fellowship. I think fellowship can be with anyone. You can have fellowship with anyone in church, in your group. So that's all, I guess. Distinguish it.
I think as youth, an important fellowship that we should have is with our own like youth group, and that little group that you have, it's like God gave you those people in your lives. You're in that place in your life for a reason. It's not just out of the random, and it's not just random people, because God had a purpose and you have that fellowship with them for reasons that you may learn along the way.
I think mine's like in between both of you, because like Isaac said, you can have fellowship with anybody, and you're saying it's specifically the people God called you to. I feel like it's kind of a little bit of both. Like you can have fellowship with anybody, but it's important to have fellowship with the people God placed in your life. Like you can have fellowship with anybody, but I think it also goes down to that having those conversations, learning from the other person. Like I'm not gonna have fellowship with someone who's gonna lead me down a different path that I shouldn't be. Like
Bad influences.
Yeah, like bad influences. Like you can have friendships, but like the fellowship aspect, it's about growing and helping each other grow and helping each other put those building blocks.
So like ties in what Melly was saying about like learning from each other.
Yeah, I feel like that's a part of it.
Yeah, so like I totally agree with Lily. Like fellowship to me is like learning, and like we're building off each other. Like you're growing, I'm growing, and we're growing together. Mm-hmm. Like sometimes I feel like friendship I define as like we're gonna have a good time together, and for me like fellowship is like we're gonna grow together. Because I have friends where like I know it's not good, but like we don't help each other grow, and I have like fellowships where like I'm like you help me and I help you, and together we're growing together. So like how do you think the Bible defines fellowship? Or like any verses that you have? Because I have one. It's Philippians 2, and it says, "Is there any encouragement from belonging to Christ? Any comfort from His love? Any fellowship together in the Spirit? Are your hearts tender and compassionate? They make me truly happy by agreeing wholeheartedly with each other, loving one another, and working together with one mind and purpose. Don't be selfish. Don't try to impress each other. Be humble, thinking of others as better than yourself. Don't look out only for your own interests, but take an interest in others too." So when I think of fellowship, this is like the verse that comes to my mind.
I think like one of the things about that passage is the working as one mind. Like you have to be in agreement about what you guys are talking about. In agreement, like I said, like I think that's why it's so important that it has to be God-centered conversations, because then you guys are all in agreement at least on that one thing, which is God, which is like the key to everything is God in the middle and God centered. So if you're having conversations, even if you have different perspectives about the Bible, different perspectives about your walk with Christ, like you guys are still in agreement about God in the center of it. It's okay to have disagreement, but the one mind is still centered on God.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. And like working together and loving each other wholeheartedly. Because sometimes, like, as we were discussing, like, someone does something bad to you and, like, you don't love them wholeheartedly. Like, yes, you say, like, I love you, but do you really love them with, like, all your heart? So that's something that, like, when I think of fellowship, that really hits hard.
So a couple verses that I found was in 1 Thessalonians 5:9 through 11 and 14 through 16. For God chose to save us through our Lord Jesus Christ, not to pour out his anger on us. Christ died for us so that whether we are alive or dead, when he returns, we can live with him forever. So encourage each other and build each other up, just as you are already doing. I think that little part of just as you are already doing, like in that group of fellowship, if you're not building each other up, like that's not a healthy surrounding environment to be in. And 14 through 18 says, brothers and sisters, we urge you to warn those who are lazy, encourage those who are timid, take tender care of those who are weak, be patient with everyone, see that no one pays back evil for evil, but always try to do good to each other and to all people. Always be joyful, never stop praying, be thankful in all circumstances, for this is God's will for you who belongs to Christ Jesus. So I think that was just like a really good definition for me of like what fellowship is supposed to be including in that. So we should be more compassionate to the people in verses 14 through 18 that says like the timid, those who are weak, and those who are lazy. We should be encouraging those people to build up and try to do better.
I think that ties in with like what Melly was saying, whereas don't look out just for your own interest, but for others too.
Yeah, because
For
I
being
think
compassionate.
it's like sometimes we're so self-centered. Like we're so focused on what we're doing and like we don't realize like the person next to us needs help.
Yeah.
And like our help to them could be such a blessing, and like our fellowship with other people, like we should be helping them and we should be like teaching them. Like if I learned something today and I'm like, wow, like I think this would be good for you, I'll teach you and you can teach me the same.
And I think it just kind of goes what it says, like we're supposed to be building each other up. It's kind of like that thing, like you want your circle to be a winning circle, like you want your team to be a team that's growing, that's trying to succeed. Like I don't know about you, like I don't feel like I am growing if all my friends are just like being lazy and like whatever. My friends have to be people that are like consistently doing something, because then I'm like, okay, I need to consistently do something. Like your group should push you up and elevate you and motivate you. Because it's like, it just goes to like the whole idea about fellowship. It's like the people you surround yourself with have such a huge influence on the way you behave. They're either going to help build you up or they're going to bring you down with them. And I think it's also, we're called to also help build people up. Like it says, you know, help those that are timid. Some people are just simply shy. They, you know, they're more quiet, they're more reserved. Because sometimes it's even something as small as they don't feel like they can relate to someone else. And we're called to be like, hey, like, let's get to know each other. And I think that's something that is super important, just even as youth and in the church, is getting to know that person that's like maybe quiet, or that person that maybe doesn't care about church too much, like having those conversations, having that time to just build with them and help them, because we don't know if they're going through something that we would never even know unless we talk to them, you know. And it's like even just being able to pray over people and just love on them when they need it the most. And I think that's a big aspect about fellowship. It's helping.
So like, do you guys have any examples in your own life of like fellowship? Like of someone you're like, wow, like I've had amazing fellowship with this person. I could like explain, like I have like really good fellowship with like someone, and like if I'm feeling really down, I call that person, like they uplift me. That's like what I think fellowship is. Like if I'm at my lowest point, like if I'm crying in my car, I want to be able to like call, like even my mom, like I want to be able to call you and be like, this is what's happening, like can you help me get back up? Like that's like such important fellowship to me, like someone that can pick you back up when you're feeling down.
I feel like I personally, like I said, I tend to surround myself with people that I know are gonna be motivating, that are gonna be influencing me. So when it comes to like those kind of things, like my friends are the type that like, if I call them, I'm like, yo, I'm going through it. Like it is like they will pause what they got going on just to get me out of the funk that I'm in and be like, all right, we're good, let's keep it moving. You know, and I think it's so important to realize, like, do you have those people that will be like, hey, like, here's a word of encouragement. Here's a Bible verse that might help you. Even if they're not, like I have friends that aren't Christians, but they still, like, will be like, do you want me to pray for you? Just because they know that I am. And they'll be like, I'll pray with you if that's going to make you feel better. I'll pray with you. And it's just something that it's, like, it's something so small, but it's so crucial to your growing as a Christian and to your growing in a relationship with God, is having people who encourage that growth. I personally think it's super important. I think it's great that God gives people in your life that are there that like, hey, if you're going through it, let's pray about it. Here's a Bible passage, like something so small, like text them, hey, here's a little verse that I was thinking about. It made me think about what you're going through. I felt like you needed this word of encouragement, you know?
Yeah, for me, I feel like a lot of the friends that I've made going to school, they kind of just like know, and we have that like connection that like we kind of know when someone's going through something. We just kind of like go back and forth, try to encourage each other up and uplift each other. Like if we're saying, you know what, school is kicking me in the butt right now, like I just want to drop out, they're like, dude, like you're halfway done, don't do that to yourself, or you just have this year left, like you got this, I know you're smart enough. Like it's just those words that kind of like get to you, that you're like, okay, like God put these people in my life and they're here just to help me out, and we're here to uplift each other.
I agree more with like with Natalie was saying. Yeah, it was like my friends like, or my fellowship, I guess you say.
Fellowship buddies.
Fellowship buddies. All right, so like how we just really just motivate each other, and like ask each other like, what's going on? How are you doing? Are you planning like bigger things?
That's awesome examples. So Natalie had a question for us.
My question for y'all, we're going to talk about this in class, is if you were to see yourself how others see you, would you have fellowship with yourself?
I feel like a big thing is like how you like your persona around people. Like if you give off super cocky vibes, I'm gonna be like, oh bro, I'm not trying to have fellowship with you. But then I gotta think about myself, like, do I give off those vibes? I feel like, I don't know, like, would you guys have fellowship with me?
I mean, I already did.
The silence.
I think I would. Like, you're like a cool person to be around.
Honestly, I think if you were to ask me this 5 years ago or even like 3 years ago, I would definitely not have fellowship with myself. Like where I was back then, like the way I felt like I was more closed off back then, like I would not be like, oh, I'm trying to have fellowship with that girl. I think me now, after going more in depth into like having a relationship with God and like where I'm at now and like just the experiences I've gone through and like everything that life's thrown at me, like the fact that I'm like at the place that I'm at, I would definitely have fellowship with myself. But like I said, if this was before, I'd be like, oh heck no, I'm not trying to have fellowship with her.
Yeah, I feel the same. Like if it was me like a couple years ago, like months ago maybe, I would be like, no, she's so mean. Like even months ago, I'd be like, no, she's so mean. Maybe even today I wouldn't be friends. But that like keeps you, I wouldn't even be a fellowship. But that keeps you in check with yourself. Like look at this, like you wouldn't even be friends with yourself. Like why would other people want to be with like that? So that keeps you in check, like, oh, I gotta fix this in my life. I gotta humble myself. I gotta start being nicer to people. So I think that's like something that I'm working on with myself.
Yeah, I definitely agree with Melly. Like, I feel like this quarantine was a lot of self-reflection, and it's like looking at like how have I been living my life? Like, am I a person that others would like to have around, or do I give off like toxic energy that it's like, yeah, I don't know if I want to hang out with her. But I feel like I've been growing, and like growing in my relationship with God, I feel like it's been like changing a lot of those characteristics that I think would be part of someone that I'd want to have fellowship with.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think I would have fellowship with myself, but I don't know. It's kind of hard to judge yourself. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But I think you can tell by if the people that are around you, like if they're growing away from you or you're going closer to people. So me personally, I think I've been growing closer to a lot more people instead of pushing them away. So I think I'd be pretty cool with myself.
I think that's a really good point that like we could reflect on and realize like why are people either moving away from me or getting closer to me? Like if people are getting closer to you and want to have that fellowship, like I think that speaks a lot of volumes. But like if it's a constant pattern and people are like, I don't know if I want to be with that person, like that should speak to you as well. Like what is it that is making people not want to have that fellowship with me?
Yeah, even just like people being able to like talk to you about things. Like if someone can't talk to you about something that's even concerning like you, like that's kind of a problem. That means you're like very closed off. And as followers of Christ, we're meant to be loving wholeheartedly, like Manny said in that verse. Like we're supposed to wholeheartedly love people, and if we wholeheartedly love everyone, like we would get off the impression of like you can come to me and I'm gonna pray for you, I'm gonna be there for you, we will work through it together, and I'm not gonna just be like, oh damn, that sucks, and call it a day, you know?
Yeah.
Because I think God calls us to be of service to people. And in being of service to people, that means praying over people, helping them when they're in those lows and helping them get up. Because at some point, we're going to be in a low, and it's like, if we couldn't help someone when they were in their lows, they're not going to want to help us. They're going to be like, you let me suffer and figure it out by myself. You figure it out by yourself.
Yeah.
Go ahead. I think it's also one of those, like, how are you when other people are in need? I think that also is a good, like looking at the mirror is also just looking at how you are with other people. And especially, like, the youth, which are the people God, like, specifically designates for you to have fellowship with consistently.
Yeah, he planted in your life.
Like, he planted, yeah.
Yeah, so I like what you just said, like how fellowship with this, fellowship with others is. I like looking at Jesus because he obviously had like an amazing fellowship with like his disciples. And like, how do you think Jesus was as like a fellowship? Like,
His fellowship?
Yeah, in his fellowship with others and like with the disciples. I like to look at their fellowship. So like, what are your thoughts on that?
I think it just ties into what I was saying earlier. Like, people were running towards him, just trying to get to know him, try to just see him.
Yeah.
So,
try to learn something from him.
Yeah.
And like, also some people didn't even agree with him, and he still loved them.
Yeah. I feel like looking at Jesus and like the disciples, like their relationship, I think it's so interesting. Like, if you look at how the disciples were, like, they were just consistently in awe of Jesus every single time. And it was like, anytime they like started to be like, I don't know about this guy,
Like,
he'd be like, yeah, I feel like he'd just be like, all right, let me show up and show you what it is that I can do. Gain your trust, gain your belief in me, which is like, he shouldn't even have had to done that. But like, the fact that he still does it, it's that reassurance, I think. And I think that's something that's very key to like fellowship with Jesus and like his disciples. He always gave reassurance. Like, he didn't leave them with a doubt, like, I don't know about him, like, he's kind of sus. Like, no, like, it was always like, this is me. There's no a lie about it. He was a very transparent person, and I feel like it reflects in fellowship and with other people, because if you're transparent, it allows them to be transparent.
Yeah.
Because you don't have to like put up a front. And Jesus never had to hide anything. He was always very true, very intentional about who he was, who he is, and just what he was doing. And I think it reflected a lot when you see the relationship and the dynamic between him and the disciples.
Yeah, so my favorite thing between Jesus and the disciples is that he never judged them. And like, my favorite thing, like, not even with the Jesus and other people, he never judged them. Like, the lady that touched his mantle, he didn't say like, don't let her touch me. Like she said, come to me. He said, like, the weak and the weary, come to me. Yeah. And that's my favorite thing about Jesus. Like, he didn't judge them. And sometimes, me personally, I'm like quick to judge someone, and like, I'm worried about my own interests, and like, I try to look at Jesus, like, he doesn't judge them. He just like loves them for who they are.
I think Jesus and the disciples, for me, like, when I think about it, Jesus, he encouraged the disciples that they can do God's work as well, and not just Jesus. And I think that was just like really interesting, because like, Jesus, he was never like, oh, you can't do it, step aside, I'll step in. He always said, no, like, you got this, have faith. Like, I'm not the only one that God uses. He could use any of us. And I think that's just like a really good aspect to think about, that if Jesus was encouraging his friends, like, why aren't we encouraging our friends sometimes? Like, even in the highs and the lows, we should encourage our friends all the times.
Yeah.
No, that's
I don't know, so I guess I'll add on to what Natalie was saying. So like, when like, was it Peter that was on the boat?
Yeah.
They told him to walk in the water. So like, like you can walk on water. Come on, like, I don't know, just like being an encouragement to people.
Yeah, and he also taught them so much. Like Natalie said, like, oh, like, you don't need me. Like, he taught them, like, when I'm gone, like, you're gonna be able to do this stuff.
I mean, it even says in the Bible, like, we're called to do even bigger miracles than what Jesus did. Like, I think about it and I'm like, he resurrected like Lazarus from the dead, and we're supposed to do bigger things. Like, we're literally called to do bigger things. And I think that goes into the whole fellowship thing. Like, Jesus was someone who enabled. He never said like, you can't do that. He was never like, don't do this, don't do that. It was always, you have the ability if you have me. Like, if you believe, if you have that faith, you're able to do these miracles. You're able to do these big things, but to glorify God. not for our own self-interest, not for our own self-glorification, but for the glory of God. And I think that's a big thing as well to throw in there.
Yeah, so like I would say, like Jesus is like the perfect example of like fellowship, like how we should treat others. So how is your fellowship with God? That's my next question. How do you think you have a fellowship with God?
I think my fellowship with God, like, sometimes I'm kind of like, Jesus, please help me out with this. And then he's like, dude, you got this. And I'm like, I don't know, Jesus, like, I don't know if I could actually do this. And, like, he's kind of like that encouragement a lot. Like, he uses other people to, like, encourage him and be like, dude, you got this. And it's like, once I do it, I'm like, okay, like, God, you know I do it. But I was, like, kind of shy girl to do it. And sometimes I think I kind of just, not abuse, but, like, I sometimes just use that. And I'm like, Jesus, please help me out with this. And I'm like, oh, my God, like, Jesus, I forgot, like, I need to pray and stuff like that. So I think I want to get better and have more of a regular fellowship with him, and just strive to not have to have it as like a God that like, oh, I need to pray right now, oh, I need to talk to God right now. Like, I think just to have it more like, oh, it's normal. It's a normal thing to do.
So like what I think like fellowship with God is like when like I'm having a bad day, like God like gives me peace. And like same thing with like a friend, like like when you're feeling down, they like motivate you. And same thing with God, like when I'm feeling like at my lowest, like at the rock bottom, God's like, no, I have plans for you, plans to prosper you. And like little like verses will come in my head and I'm like, oh wait, I got this.
God's got me.
God's got me. And like that's how I think of like my fellowship with God. Even though like I do this stuff, like Natalie said, like I feel like this burden, like he still got me even though of that, because he's so merciful.
I feel like as far as like fellowship with God, like personally, I think it's become more of like something I need. Like before, it was just like, all right, if I have the time, I'll pray, I'll read the Bible, I'll just have a moment of worship, just listening to worship music. And like as I've grown older and just like as things happen and like the different seasons, even just during this pandemic, I feel like it's more of a necessity. Like having that time with God and like just being able to like set aside time, just like me and him, I'm just going to worship in the car by myself while I'm driving. I'm just going to set aside time in the morning to wake up and just pray to God and just talk to God. Like it's become more of like just habitual to do that. Like I just need it almost. And I feel like when it changes from like it being a burden, like I need to set aside that time, to like I need to set aside time. Like I need it, because if not, I don't feel at peace, which kind of goes with that. Like I feel like once you start getting into that like routine of just setting aside 10 minutes to talk to God, setting aside 10 minutes to just listen to a worship song and just like fully dive into that, like it's so peaceful and like so calming, and it's just like, I don't know, like it's such a relieving feeling. I feel like it's just like weight off of my shoulder, like whatever's going on that day, like it doesn't even matter, it's like something that's like, I don't even know why I was tripping, like I think that's to the point where it's become, but like it's also been a process to get to that point of fellowship. Like it was a lot of like, I don't want to do this, I don't want to pray, I don't want to read the Bible, I don't want to talk to God, especially when it was more so like a lot of guilt. You don't want to go to God because you're like, oh God, hey, like I'm kind of going through it right now, kind of need you. And it's like guilt because I knew I was only going to God when I needed him, not when I was trying to thank him, not for just that communion and that fellowship with him. Instead, it was just more so like, I just need you to do this for me because I'm going through it. And then that's it. And then I'm good.
And take
instead of praising and reminding ourselves, like, God doesn't have to do what he does for us, but he does it anyways. And I think that's when it's like you're supposed to want to have fellowship. When someone's doing all these things out of pure love, like, why wouldn't you want to spend time with them?
Yeah, and so going off of what you just said, like, sometimes, like, they do it even though, like, we take and, like, won't get back. My favorite example is, like, Judas in the Bible. Like, it's so crazy to me that God knew, he even told him, like, you're going to deny me. You're going to say, like, you don't know me. And you're going to say all this stuff. But he still let him sit at the table. Like, that's, like, Jesus knew he was going to deny him. And he still said, like, I'm going to die for this person. And, like, I think about that myself. Like, God's like, you're going to deny me and you're going to do this stuff, but I'm still going to die for you. And, like, that's how, like, fellowship is defined for me. Like, God, Jesus said, like, I'm gonna die for you, even though this,
Mm-hmm.
because he knows we're gonna sin. But he said, I want you to have that chance. And like that's my favorite thing about like fellowship is that we have a chance.
Well, for me personally, it's like a weight off your shoulders. It's like peace, I guess, because I don't like telling people like my problems. Like I don't know, like venting. I'm not really about that. But I feel like God just like gets the weight off your chest. It's just that person you can go to that you can always rely on.
Yeah, I think just going off of something that Melly was mentioning, she would mention about like Jesus had a place for Judah at the table, and that's going into the idea of the Holy Communion that we read about in the Bible, and the breaking of bread. And I think for me that's the biggest example of not just communion. Obviously, that's where it commenced, but fellowship, because it's only Jesus and the 12 disciples, and he's giving the announcement of his death basically to his closest group. It's his circle, and he's telling them like, hey, this is gonna happen, and I want to have this time of fellowship by having communion, and he breaks the bread with these people, and he gives each piece to each person, and he's having this time where it's just them. I feel like it just defines everything else that comes after. Like, he knew one person at that table was gonna betray him, deny him 3 times. And he still said, I'm breaking the bread and I'm giving you a piece. And I think for us, it's so easy to deny someone a spot at our table. Whereas God knew what was gonna happen, knew that he was gonna get denied and have betrayal. And he still said, I have a spot for you at my table. And I think that's something that's so crazy about Jesus and like the fellowship he has, because we're so quick to be like, you don't have a space here.
You did this.
You did this. You're not allowed at my table.
Pause it right there.
And I think, and if you think about it like that, like, yeah, it's like you can't sit with us. And it's like, would Jesus even be allowed to sit with you? And it's like, when you get into like that like idea, like, would I even allow Jesus at my table? And if we're like those people that are like, oh, I don't want someone who's like this and that, like judgmental, like, Jesus was eating with like the worst of the worst. He was breaking bread with like
the tax collectors.
The people that are corrupt, and he's like, I got a place for them at my table. He had a place for someone who persecuted his own people, and it's like he still said, I got space for you, and I'm gonna break my bread and I'm gonna share this piece with you. And it's like
mind-blowing to me.
Yeah, I feel like it's something like you start thinking about it and you're just like, dang, like, would Jesus actually have a place at my table? Because he was like with the corrupt people. He was with the people that everyone hated. He was with the poor, the ones that were, like back in those days, like if you had a disease, you had to be casted away. And he was like, come to me. Come to me, everyone, all those who are weary, all those who are broken, who are in need, like, I will embrace you wholeheartedly. And we're so quick to be like, that homeless man at the gas station, get away from me, Like, we're so quick to be judgmental like that. And it's like, so you wouldn't break bread with that person, but Jesus would.
Yeah.
And it says a lot about how much on a high horse we are. And it's like, we need to ground ourselves and become humble and realize, like, who are you letting at your table and what are the requirements? Because Jesus didn't have requirements for his table.
And it like comes back to like what we like said, like define fellowship as like being humble, because being humble is like such a big part of like having fellowship and like forgiving others, even though like you're like, well, they said this about me, and that for me is so hard. Like if someone says something or like does something, I'm like, no, I don't want you to sit at my table. But God, even though they said stuff about him, he still said, you can come sit with me. That's my favorite thing about that.
I think like how Melly said, like Melly or Lily, one of you talked about how we're on our high horse, and like I could relate that to myself. Like, I'm like, am I on my own, like, pedestal? Like, oh, you can't sit here, you could sit here, you can't, like, would I be allowed to sit at other people's tables? Like, I always have to think that in my head, like, would I be allowed to sit at Ureli's table? Would I be allowed to sit at Isaac's table? Melissa's table? Like, are we going to be so high-horsed on ourselves that, like, you guys can't sit with me at my table, but, like, if someone else says you can't sit at my table, then like I feel like I'd be like, why? like
yeah.
Me? What? Like I feel like that's like a good thing to think about. Like
Like you expect to have a space at their table, but you won't give them one.
Yeah. A little humbling moment.
Well, you guys said most of it, but I agree with you guys. I was really about being humble. It's really being able to talk to anyone and everyone, no matter who they are or what they're going through.
Yeah, I think it goes into the idea of just fellowship with others, which is something that Isaac mentioned in the beginning. Like, you should be able to have fellowship with anybody, right? And it's like, how do we approach that? I think is the question. Like, how do you approach having fellowship with someone who maybe is barely starting this walk with Christ? Like, how would you guys approach it?
Like being humble, because like that's the first thing. You have to humble yourself down and like, you were once like them, or maybe you are back to how you're not even as good as they were, and like encouraging them to like start their walk with Jesus, because it's hard at the beginning.
I think a big part is like relating to them. Like, you know, I was there too, but look where I'm at now. Not trying to be like
They
like
put it in their
self-glorifying?
face.
yeah, self-glorifying, but like to motivate, to
Yeah.
encourage.
Yeah, like I think we shouldn't. I think sometimes we get like a little bit jealous and we're like, how are they doing so good if they just started on their journey? And you just start thinking about like, I've been in this journey for like, let's say 16 years and I'm not even at that level. Like, how are they doing it that fast? I think it's having, like how Medi said, that humbling moment that each relationship is separate. It's your own walk, your own pace with God.
I think something about that also is just like, I think it makes you check your own relationship, because it's like maybe you've let your relationship become dormant.
Yeah.
Maybe you're not having fellowship with God the way you're supposed to, as much as you should. And someone who's freshly in their walk with Christ, I feel like they're like all in. They're like, I'm having fellowship with God every single day. Like, I'm trying to talk to God every single day. Like, this is how my day went, God.
Me.
Yeah, like, hey, God, it's me.
Hey, God,
It's
what's
your
up?
boy. You know? Like, it's one of those things, like, I don't know. I feel like
They just want to learn more.
like they're so in like this fire
Eager.
and eager and so like ready and in love with falling in love with God. And I feel like being someone who grew up in the church, who's born into the church, like it's a gradual thing. And I feel like it's easy for us to forget that we're supposed to be falling in love with God. And it's very easy to like just allow the relationship to kind of sizzle down. And I think that causes the problem. Like, then you're just, like, jealous of, like, oh, look at their relationship. Like, they're going
It's
on
probably all
cute walks
fake.
and this and that. You know, you're, like, start becoming, like, a hater. Like, that's all show. Like, they're not actually that happy. Because it's a self-reflection of your relationship. Because you've allowed your relationship to sizzle down and become dormant, that you forget, like, hey, I'm supposed to put in effort.
Yeah.
And that person's coming in with all the effort. Because they're like, this is fresh, this is new, I'm coming in, this is honeymoon phase. You know, like, this is like, I'm all in. And we've gotten to the point where, like, we've let that honeymoon phase go. And when it comes to Jesus, like, we're supposed to be in that honeymoon phase 24/7. Like, I'm always trying to, let's go, God, let's talk. Like, let's have fellowship. Let me praise you. Let me thank you. I'm going through it right now, but I know you got me. Like, that kind of energy and that kind of just desire to want to have fellowship with God. And I feel like when you see it on other people, like, you should be like, I need to get like that again. Or if you never were there, like, I need to get to that point.
Yeah.
So the next question I have for you guys is how could someone actually get into that fellowship then? Like, start a fellowship within their community.
Just talk, I think.
Yeah, I could start. It's easy as a conversation.
I think it's just mainly the first, like,
Initially.
initiating the conversation that's always like the hardest part. But like, once you start talking to people and you start learning about like their lives, like even like having fellowship with your parents, like you learn so much about your parents that you're like, oh, I didn't know about this, you know. And it's like, oh dang, like, oh, that's crazy,
You
you
had a
know.
life before me?
You were cool before me. What?
What?
You're so hold on. What? Like, it's one of those things, like, you have fellowship with people and you learn so much more than you ever could have imagined. Like, you're just like, oh dang, like even having fellowship with like pastor, like I feel like it's something that we're like, oh no, not the pastor. I mean, it's our deal, but like it's one of those things. Like, I feel like when you have conversations, like I know, like even just like talking to like my deal, like he'll like tell me like stuff and I'm just like, oh dang, like that's really cool. Like I didn't know that about you. And it's like you're able to learn from a person and you're able to grow those connections that allow them to kind of like, you kind of mentioned about like with your friends, you guys just kind of know. I feel like that comes with the fellowship aspect. Like hey, let's have Bible study together. Like something so small, like let's just talk about this small verse. Grab coffee. Like I think it's so easy to start the fellowship, but it's just the initial. Like having fellowship is easy, but it's starting it that's a little bit more difficult. But I think sometimes it's as easy like, hey, do you just want to grab a cup of coffee and like let's just talk, let's just chat, you know?
Yeah. I feel the same way.
So we're about to start closing up, and a question that I had for you guys to just meditate and think on. We're going to discuss this on Sunday. It's if you don't want to put in efforts with the community that God gave you, which are physical people, how are you going to put in effort to a relationship with someone you can't see?
I think when we're talking about community, it's us as a youth group, us in the church. Like if we're not able to like be present in the conversations with somebody, like one, you'll never be able to get to know them, learn. Because I feel like a lot of times you can learn from someone, whether they're younger than you, older than you, whether they've just started coming to church or they've been in the church. Like there's so much room for us to learn from each other, and I think that's what God intends for us. Like that's why He places people, because we're supposed to be aids in someone's life. Like we're gonna help you in some way, even if you don't understand it, even if it's not your favorite person. Like they're a crucial aspect to your growth. And I think it's like if we can't even be present in conversation with them, how are you having fellowship with God? Because you can't even see Him. Like I don't know, I think it challenges you to like think about fellowship and think about if you're even having conversation with God, or if you're just pulling up to God whenever you need help and saying like, hey Jesus, I got this going on, help me out. All right, bye.
Okay, thanks.
And then a quick, oh, thanks God, I passed the test. All right, I'm out. And you forget about God for a minute until you're like, oh,
the next
dang,
problem comes.
my car broke down. God, help me start this car. And then it starts, thanks God. And then you just forget about like,
just dip.
Yeah, like it's so quick to like dip. It's
You
like
leave the door open.
Just like, well, are you not gonna talk to me? Like, are we not gonna have that communion? Like, it's just like Manny had mentioned earlier. Like, just take, and it's like, where's the praise? And I think like, even just like with each other, like we don't have to like go to someone when we need something. Like, I could just have a conversation with you, and like, hey, let's just talk about like.
Yeah, and you don't have to be best friends with that
Yeah.
person. Like I think people like think fellowship is like being best friends. Like no, you don't have to be best friends. Like just even like talking to them and being like, how's your day? Like and even like giving them some words of encouragement. Like if you can do that, you can,
Fellowship should be easy.
yeah. If you can't have like a relationship with like physical people, you're never gonna make it to heaven. And that's just
Oh, recently that Daisy wanted me to read. It says two people are better off than one, for they can help each other succeed. If one person falls, the other can reach out and help. But someone who falls alone is in real trouble. A person standing alone can be attacked and defeated, but two can stand back to back and conquer. Three are even better, for triple braided cord is not easily broken.
Thanks, Daisy.
Thank you, Daisy.
that was a good one to close.
That was
off.
a good one, yeah. So we'll be discussing fellowship. So please come with. There was a lot of questions asked. We will be bringing these up.
Bring your verses.
Bring your verses. Bring anything you have
Your own
about just
research.
fellowship and like what your guys'
Watch the video.
take is. Watch the video,
Obviously.
please.
If you got to this part of the video,
Your code to
screenshot
walk
it and
in.
I will give you $1.
For real?
Yeah. I'll probably give you not $1. I'll probably give you like a cookie.
If you come on Sundays with Coach Shillissa, you get a cookie.
Don't even say anything. Just come up to me and be like,
Shalissa,
no.
And you get a cookie. So we know you're watching and you're fully watching and paying attention.
don't tell
Because this
anyone
is us having fellowship, right? Just through a screen.
Just some
I
homies.
don't even like them.
He loves this lying. But so we will be discussing fellowship and kind of going in a little bit into communion, more so in class. So please come ready, come prepared, and come present and ready to just have fellowship with us, right? And yeah, go ahead and subscribe to the YouTube channel if you haven't subscribed yet, and follow the ICMD Youth Instagram. I think that's it.
Yeah.
Bye, guys.